age of steam power and the long steel rail have left an indelible impression on us all, young and old. The railroad evokes images associated with the geographical and economic expansion of our country, especially in the West. But nowhere has the railroad had a greater influence than in the rugged southern Appalachians. The original settlers of the area that includes eastern Kentucky, southwest Virginia, eastern Tennessee, and western North Carolina labored in isolation. There were no roads to speak of, and water travel was largely restricted to canoes and small boats. Travelers brought news and gossip, and sometimes even mail to the settlers of the Appalachian wilderness. When the American Revolution erupted in the East, the Over-Mountain men recognized that the outcome of the struggle would affect their own destiny. They kept in touch with events in the East and participated in the war when the opportunity presented itself. In fact, one of the crucial battles of the war, the Battle of Kings Mountain, October the 7th, 1780, was fought and won by these supposedly isolated backwoodsmen. The people of southern Appalachia were as active in the economy of the new nation as they were in its political struggles. The mountains were rich in natural resources. Fur trapping soon gave way to animal husbandry and farming. As early as the 1780s, lumbering and mining emerged as important industries. In fact, the iron mines of Iberville, Tennessee, and Cranberry, North Carolina, provided the bullets for the colonists fighting at Kings Mountain. While most settlers provided for themselves through farming and home industries, they also established networks of trade with downriver communities and even distant markets for their timber, livestock, and minerals. Still, the mountains stood as a formidable barrier to trade and economic development. By contrast, the commercial and industrial potential of the Northeast and the Midwest developed rapidly during the first half of the 19th century. But as these centers of economic activity grew, they needed the coal and timber of Appalachia. To bring these materials to where they were needed, entrepreneurs turned to the railroad. As railroads pierced the mountainous terrain of the Appalachians, they transformed the appearance of the region and the lifestyles of its inhabitants. Isolated hamlets became railway boom towns. Distant hilltops became resort centers, lodges, and hotels. Formerly inaccessible mineral deposits and virgin forests were now open to exploitation. While the railroads did bring in many outsiders to build and manage these new operations, they also drew upon an abundant local workforce. Many a mountain farmer became a logger, railroad laborer, or coal miner. The long steel rail brought goods from the nation's industrial centers and carried the natural resources of the Appalachians to distant markets. Here in East Tennessee, there are still many people who remember the heyday of railroading in the southern mountains and can tell us how the long steel rails brought Appalachia closer to the commercial and cultural life of America as a whole. But the story of the coming of the railroads to the East Tennessee area begins more than a century ago.
Oh, you ought to been uptown and see that train come down. I hear the whistle blow 100 miles. Oh, Lord. Darling, I hear that train coming around the bend. Blowed like she'd never blow again. Train 25.
The first railroad to reach East Tennessee came by way of Atlanta in the early 1850s. The next line connected Chattanooga with Knoxville via Cleveland, Tennessee. These tracks became part of the East Tennessee, Virginia, and Georgia Railroad, which reached Bristol, Tennessee in 1856, and then went on to Petersburg and Richmond. During the Civil War, this rail line served as a vital military link, and indeed the only one, between Atlanta, the arsenal of the Confederacy, and Richmond, its capital. After the war between the states, other railroads linked East Tennessee with the industrial Midwest through Knoxville and Cincinnati. This network eventually became what is today the Southern Railway System. In 1879, local railroad development commenced in Upper East Tennessee itself with the founding of the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad. with its main offices in Johnson City, Tennessee. While the ET and WNC extended eastward to Elizabethton and Hampton and through the Doe River Gorge to Cranberry, North Carolina. This line provided an outlet for the rich iron ore deposits of the Cranberry area. Hundreds of thousands of tons of iron ore traveled on the ET and WNC to the Cranberry Furnace in Johnson City.
The same company owned the mines at Cranberry, the ET and WNC Railroad, and the Cranberry Furnace Company, and the headquarters was located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The furnace was located on East Fairview Avenue, below what is now the Empire Furniture Company, and the railroad was built to bring the ore from Cranberry to Johnson City.
Later, the ET and WNC, also affectionately known as the Tweetsie, carried timber and tourists as well. The guest of the popular 166-room Cloudland Hotel, so called because of its lofty location atop Roan Mountain, arrived by way of the ET and WNC. The ballroom of the Cloudland was constructed directly over the Tennessee-North Carolina state line, so that one could dance away the evening in both states without leaving the dance floor. The name Tweetsie suggests a toy-like quality, and indeed the ET and WNC was a small railroad, both in terms of the length of its lines and the size of its train crews. The ET and WNC used narrow-gauge tracks in constructing its lines. Its rail ties were set 3 feet apart instead of the standard gauge width of 4 feet 8 1/2 inches. In spite of its minuscule size, the Tweetsie achieved a number of major engineering achievements, including the crossing of Linville Gap at an altitude of 4,100 feet above sea level, the highest point ever reached by a train in the eastern United States. The ET and WNC also promoted the growth of industry in East Tennessee and western North Carolina. Tweetsie traffic declined with the depletion of the iron ore deposits and timber along the line. The building of highways in the 1920s and 30s also hurt its freight and passenger business. In 1950, the Tweetsie abandoned its tracks east of Elizabethton, Tennessee. But thanks to the addition in 1918 of a third rail widening the line to standard gauge, the tracks between Johnson City and Elizabethton are still used as an industrial switching line. The steam-powered Tweetsie also survives as a popular tourist attraction at Blowing Rock, North Carolina. The ET and WNC was one of many lines built in East Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, and Western North Carolina following the Civil War.
Next stop will be Johnson City, Tennessee, 431 miles from Washington. The elevation of Johnson City, Tennessee, 1,750 feet above sea level. Johnson City, Tennessee, the home of T. Boone, Daniel Boone, the man that killed a bear of a steep tree with a stick. Johnson, Tennessee, you can get the best flour and most ever made biscuits out in your life. The Red Band Flour Manufacturing. And out of the way, people of Johnson City, don't forget your suitcases, pocketbooks, hats, overcoats, gloves, umbrellas, doll babies, and little children, please. And everything will be all right.
It was mainly coal, iron, and timber that attracted the builders and promoters of these roads. The lure of these untapped natural resources and the burgeoning demands of Midwestern industries and southern seaboard businesses made it easy for railroad builders to find financial backers. For example, the American Association, an English financial group, financed the construction of the Knoxville, Cumberland Gap, and Louisville Railroad, which eventually became part of the Southern Railway system with Appalachian headquarters located in Knoxville. money alone did not make the railroads of the region. It took people, and lots of them. To cut through the rugged terrain, railway companies blasted tunnels through rock, built numerous trestles and bridges, and laid thousands of miles of track. Prior to the First World War, nearly all this work was done by hand.
They had practically all this grading, the railroad bed for to lay the rails, and was done by hand drills, and well, they had a few steam drills in those days, but most of it was one man sat and turned the steel while two men or maybe three men drove the steel and made the holes, and then they were dynamite put in, and the rocks blown out, and then the crew came behind, smoothed it up, and laid the ties, the cross ties down. Then the rails were nailed or spiked onto that. In lining track, the man that lines the track, his calls are always joint ahead, center back, you know. In other words, they pull the joint up to where it's at, and then he comes back to the center, sets the center up, which the call from the man lining the track is joint ahead, center back. So it's
in the old days, when they first began to build railroads, you know, had no modern equipment. They built them with pick and shovel, and they drilled the rocks by hand. I mean, four men would hit that steam, and they'd finally punch a hole in the rock. And the way they move the dirt, they have mules, and there'd be maybe a crew work here, and then there'd be a crew 3 miles down the road, and a crew 3 miles up the road. But anyhow, what I was getting to, they always had a feller they called the walking balls. The reason they called him the walking balls, he would walk from one crew of work hands to the other one and give the orders. And then, well, this was the old song that you used to hear the work hands sing, you know. Walking balls, walking balls.
The building of the Clinchfield Railroad, headquartered in Irwin, Tennessee, illustrates the challenging engineering problems and grueling human effort involved in the construction of railroads in the southern Appalachians. Begun in 1886 as the Charleston, Cincinnati, and Chicago Railroad, the company completed over 100 miles of track in the Carolinas before establishing a northern office in Johnson City, Tennessee. The Three Seas line then began construction both north and south of the city, reaching the Watauga River and Irwin, respectively, before going bankrupt in the Railway Depression of 1893. In 1902, George L. Carter acquired the railroad and completed construction in 1908 on what is now the Carolina, Clinchfield, and Ohio Railroad.
Down in Tennessee, among the flowers and the hills, lives an engineer, and his name is Clinchfield. You can tell him by the whistle every time that he blows. The musical engineer on the CC&O. Fog glass Bill, setting glass and throttle. Fog glass Bill on the CC&O. Fog glass Bill, setting glass and throttle. Fog glass Bill on the CC&O.
Clinchfield Railroad traverses some of the most rugged mountainous country in the eastern United States.
in its line from the eastern Kentucky, our northern terminal, to our southern terminal in South Carolina. We cross 4 distinct mountain ranges. This route is a route that other railroads had purposely avoided and built around it, where the developers of the Clinchfield had purposely built through it in an effort to seek a short, direct transportation route from the Ohio Valley into the South Atlantic seaboard. The Clinchfield is an engineering masterpiece even by today's engineering standards. The roadbed widths, the capacities that the bridges were designed to, the dimensions that the tunnels were constructed to, even considered exceptional by today's standards. As a result of it, the Clinchfield has not had to go back, as many railroads have done, to enlarge their tunnels or strengthen their bridges in order to be able to carry modern-day equipment and traffic. The Clinchfield has 55 tunnels in the course of its line, the longest of which is approximately 7,900 feet long. It cuts through the Sandy Ridge Mountain over in southwest Virginia. There are some 72 bridges, the longest of which is 1,300 feet long and approximately 200 feet high. Clinchfield Railroad was directly responsible for the development of the southwest Virginia coal fields, resulting in the heavy tonnage from the coal fields being carried into southeastern markets. Also, there's a considerable heavy tonnage of manufactured goods moving from the industrial Midwest Great Lakes area into the southeast, and Florida phosphates moving into the Midwest and to the Ohio Valley area.
Much of the credit for these remarkable engineering achievements goes to Mr. W.C. Hatton, who served as George L. Carter's chief engineer on some of the most difficult stretches of the Clinchfield line, and who later assisted Fred Johnson in the planning of Kingsport, Tennessee.
My father's name was William Carey Hatton, and he came here with the Carter Construction Company in 1905 to build they were working on the Blue Ridge Mountain area. He was the resident engineer that built the tunnels and the bridges on the Clinchfield Railroad during that period. And apparently this had been attempted years before, and hadn't been accomplished. And his work was so satisfactory that they asked him to come back and build the Elkhorn extension on the northern end. And so he worked up there and built, I think it was 32 tunnels. He worked here until he finished that end of the railroad, and then left on other work. Before he left here, though, he went to Kingsport and laid out the pattern of the city area there.
The construction of lines like the Clinchfield had a tremendous impact on area industries. Until the federal road building program of the 1930s, the region's few highways were still largely unsuitable for industrial purposes. By the turn of this century, resources along waterways were played out, and the rivers of the region themselves were not particularly suited for heavy commercial traffic. The coming of the railroads changed this situation dramatically. The lines opened up vast regions of timber and coal, and also encouraged manufacturers to relocate in the Appalachians, where labor was cheap and raw materials plentiful. Furniture, hardwood flooring, metal finishing, and even pottery enterprises developed along rail routes.
Old Johnson City Foundry and Machine Works started in Johnson City in 1883, and it was probably started to furnish repairs for the ET&WNC Railroad. The company furnished much material for the ET&WNC and also for the Clinchfield Railroad Company. In about 1906 or 7, the company was moved from Ash Street to its present location, and located on land that was owned by Clinchfield Railroad Company, and for years the pattern house, storage house of the Clinchfield Railroad Company was located here at the plant of Johnson City Foundry, and all of its castings were made here until the railroad purchased diesel engines, and then the warehouse was purchased by the Johnson City Foundry.
We're manufacturers of hardwood flooring, particularly parquet and plank flooring. That firm was established in 1898 on Buffalo Street, and then a short time later moved to our present location on East Walnut Street. And the reason for the location at this point was to have rail facilities. And we have, in the early days, we had a log yard, and the logs used to come in by rail. That's what we call our back track. And our front track was for finished product. The railroad was really the lifeblood. The company couldn't have existed. It couldn't have been founded. It wasn't any way without the railroad service, because we're dependent on lumber, and the only way we could get it back in those days was by rail, and then also service to your customers by rail.
The railroads of East Tennessee did more than bring industry into the region and take coal, iron, and timber out. They turned sleepy little hamlets like Irwin into bustling business centers.
The impact of the railroad on Irwin was very strong. I would say it was largely responsible for the actual establishment of Irwin as a town at that time. There wasn't, until the railroad came, there really wasn't much in Irwin except a church or two and a store or two, things like that.
The railroads not only brought in industrialists to exploit the region's natural and human resources, but also tourists who were captivated by the green vistas and fresh breezes of resorts like Roan Mountain, Unaka Springs, and Alta Pass. Some mountaineers prospered from the new employment and commercial opportunities stimulated by the railroads, but the lives of others were devastated as a result of the all too frequent accidents and wrecks. In some cases, though, the impact of railroad mishaps was humorous rather than tragic.
Dear Mr. Claim Agent, your railroad run over my bull at the 220-mile post Wednesday. He are not dead, but might as well be. And I want your section boss come by and make report on him so he can get paid for it. He'd tear out a piece skin a foot square behind his navel. He are totally unqualified to be a bull. And he are maimed up too bad to be a steer. And he are too tough for beef. So I want you report him dead and pay for it. Yours truly, Simon Green. P.S. He were a red bull, but he stands round looking mighty blue since your train hit him.
While this particular incident may well have been fictitious, trains and railroad construction did cause many injuries and deaths. Despite the dangers surrounding their building and operation, the people of the mountains greeted the railroads with excitement and anticipation.
Every Saturday was a big day for us. We used to plan to go to Johnson City, and the family would all get together, and that would be the excursion for the week. And we'd go over there, shop, and spend the day. We'd go over on the passenger train from Irwin to Johnson City. And this was really the only time that we went shopping at all. And that was going to the big city. And we'd spend the day over there and come back in the evening on the same train. And I think when they took out the passenger train from the Clinchfield, that people really missed that as much as anything. Because it wasn't, in those days, they didn't have automobiles like we do now. And that was about the only transportation we had, and that's the only big city we could get to.
The railroad companies themselves recruited managers from outside the region as well as locals. While at the outset, this may have resulted in the development of migrant communities, over time, the railway people came to play an important role in community life and were accepted by the more long-standing residents.
My father came here in 1922 as chief engineer of the railroad, and my mother was a Yankee from Pennsylvania. And to her, this was the end of the world. I don't think she was accepted too much in the early years because she was rather abrupt and outspoken, and people around here were not used to too many Yankees. And so it took a good many years for her to become accepted and really fit into the community, but I think that she did. Father died in 29, so they hadn't been here very long. And her family and others that were close to her tried very hard to get her to go back to Pennsylvania. But by that time, she was so embedded in this community that she wouldn't leave, and she stayed here, although she had no relatives, no kin, nobody. She stayed here until she died.
The treaty, the Southern Lines, and the Clinchfield have all contributed and continue to contribute to the development of the Southern Appalachians. Their initial impact was primarily economic, but as railway people and services became embedded in the fabric of these mountain communities, the roads took on a much larger role in the lives of mountain people. Their impact is felt to this day.
North Carolina line. Elk Park, North Carolina. Cranberry Mine. Glendale, North Carolina. Costco. Shell Mills. Big town of Boone, North Carolina.